All right, this is part 1 of chapter 14, looking at vaccines and biotechnology. With the biotechnology, this is really focused on how we can utilize these techniques in order to identify infections and disease. A lot of times this is done through the process of serology, looking at whether or not a person has been exposed by looking at antibody levels. All right, with vaccinations, from the videos that you should have already watched, you are exposed to the fact that this process of vaccination, variolization, as some refer to it, has been going on for almost 1,000 years. And it really is a very, it's a common practice. It is a protective practice, and it is definitely beneficial to overall humanity. But it didn't really get into what one might consider scientific study until the time of Edward Jenner. And what he noticed were that milkmaids weren't affected by the outbreaks of smallpox. And this is at a time where there were small and large outbreaks, epidemics of smallpox. And smallpox can kill at fairly high levels depending on which strain of the smallpox virus you get. Now with the milkmaids, most of them had contracted what is called cowpox. Cowpox is caused by vaccinia virus, whereas smallpox is caused by smallpox virus. And the cows weren't affected by it. They might have the little pox or what would end up being kind of like warts, but it was more like scar tissue because of the viral infection. And the milkmaids would get the cowpox because the cowpox, as you saw with the videos, would be on the skin of the cows, also the udders, and just that physical contact manipulation of the udders, the milkmaids would contract the virus infection. And so Jenner suspected that with the prior cowpox infection, this led to protective immunity against smallpox. And so what he did was, like any good scientist, he tested his hypothesis that cowpox infection protected against smallpox. So he purposefully inoculated a boy, I believe he was 8 or 9 years old, with cowpox pus. So finding a cow that had active infection and intentionally taking some of that pus, which you should know contains viral particles as well as a lot of dead neutrophils, and just put that on the surface of his skin. All right, kind of scratched it in, and the boy quickly contracted cowpox, but equally just as fast recovered and had very little effect, very mild disease, and let that go on. And then after a short time, he then infected him with smallpox. And of course, this would not be done today. This is very early human, or just would be considered human experimentation, which is not allowed for good reason. But surprisingly, actually not surprisingly, the child did not have or did not contract smallpox. So as you saw in the video, this led him to continue this process, working with different age peoples, different ethnicities, just to verify that this really was a solid theory, a solid event happening inside the human body. Now, the CDC estimates that in just a short span of 20 years, vaccines presented 21 million hospitalizations and over 700,000 deaths. All right, this is leads to everyone realizing, or should realize, how important vaccinations are. And if you spread that out to worldwide, that number jumps up, blanking on the word, jumps up a lot. And then if we look at the number of individuals who die worldwide because of the lack of vaccination, it is quite profound. All right, but as you are probably aware, vaccinations are not without controversy. And the biggest controversy came back in 1998 when a scientist published in The Lancet, which is actually quite high on the impact factor. So if you get a publication in The Lancet, that means everyone should take note of it. But his study only had 12 patients, and the claim was that there was a correlation between individuals coming down with autism and those who received the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. And so then after that publication, it made, headlines in the news, newspapers, TV shows. Shortly after that publication, many parents in the United States, as well as the UK, started to decline that measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, as well as many other vaccines, thinking that if they vaccinated their children were at higher risk for autism. And that led to, really what we're still dealing with today, people fearing vaccines, people not being vaccinated, and therefore allowing diseases to come back into the population. Well, then in 2010, The Lancet fully retracted this study as bad science. Right? The study's authors were funded by lawyers of parents with autistic children who were filing lawsuits against vaccine companies. So this was a major conflict of interest. It was not pure science, pure investigatory science. It was jaded from the start. The main author lost his medical license because of fraud and malpractice. And it was noted that he specifically manipulated data. And why this was retracted was that during this time, many different studies occurred with thousands of participants, not just with the 12, that found no link between vaccines and autism. And this most recent study, published in 2015, showed that 95,000 children had no links between the MMR vaccine and autism. And this report here in 2010 didn't make a lot of evening news. It didn't make nearly as much of a news impact as the initial study. And some people didn't get this. And even once it came out that the person manipulated the data, that mindset was already set. And it's still a problem today. And that is where we will stop here for part 1.